So yes, and then at the end of your intervention schedule, that's really nice to reflect on because it's also a record of progress. If we could go on, please, Zachary. Now we're going to switch to something slightly different because we wanted again to make sure that it was incredibly practical and things that you could take away immediately. Phil-Sam spoke earlier about displays and about making sure displays are actually valuable learning resources that the children understand. I've got two examples of displays here. This is my English display, which has a talk for writing focus. Now, the children were part of every single display in our classroom. So we have on one side, their weekly spellings that we would add to with our tricky trucks. Each week when we had a new spelling, different kids would go and stick that onto the board. That makes it a point of reference for them because they've created it. You know, when you cook food, you end up liking things that you didn't think you liked because you made the food. It's just like those displays. When the children have added to those displays, they then want to use those words in their writing. They then want to check the display to check that they spelt those words correctly. We also then have what our goal is for that week. Okay, so the children are constantly reminded of what our learning outcome needs to be by the end of the week, what we want to have achieved. And then our learning journey is displayed chronologically on our displays. So we've got the talk for writing process is normally that the children are immersed in a story. So they have their story maps where they've drawn out the story and what happens at each stage in the story. And then the children, during their immersion, they might do some acting around the story, and here are pictures of them delivering their character profiles via hot seating and questioning the different characters. And then we moved on to an innovation stage where the children began to change parts of the story. So that's just really clearly shown in that learning journey to remind our children of the progression of their learning. If there's something that they're not quite getting, they can go back and check. My maths displays are very similar, although it's not so much of a journey, it's more from the concrete visual to abstract. So the children thinking about how they've used the concrete resources maybe on the Monday and Tuesday, and then how they've carried that across to their visual resources. And then finally, how that looks as abstract representations. And it's really, really important that even when children are at that abstract phase, they still have the opportunity to go in the maths drawers and take out beads to check their answers and take out Numicon. No child is too academic enough for concrete resources. Please use them, have them on the displays, encourage children to go and rip them off and use them in their active learning. Next slide, please, Zachary.
So I'm going to echo some of what Poppy has said, and I'm going to try and move on really quickly for time's sake. Poppy mentioned that the examples that she showed was following a scheme called Talk for Writing. This also is a model of Talk for Writing that we use at the school that I'm currently at. And this is for a Year 6 class. And so you'll see the first picture to the left is an example of how you would story map the text, and it was an argument. We were trying to teach children how to write balanced arguments. And so it's an example of how we read the text first, and then what I did was, and this is a smaller group, but what we did was we tried to think of symbols that would symbolize each section of the text to help us remember, so that we'd be able to tell the story without reading the text. That was step one. Then we moved on to looking at, okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages? How do we then make this argument balanced? And then we moved on to the language features that we'd be looking at, and then moving on from there. Now, these sheets of paper that I write on during the lesson, I will then have up on the walls, or I'll hang them using like a washing rod, because it's a working wall and it's something that they can refer to every single lesson. And sometimes it may be a lesson where I'm, oh, have you forgotten our context, or have you forgotten what features I'm looking for? Let me go back to the piece of work that we did a couple of days ago, and it's there for the entire time that they're working on that piece of writing. It's visual, it's purposeful, it's impactful, and it's just something that is really solid and actually really good practice. And I think across the years, you can do it from primary to secondary, just making sure that your modelled pieces of writing are up for as long as they need to be. Next slide, please. This is something else that's been quite useful and important that I've done specifically because I'm here in the Middle East at the moment, is tenses, grammar, your SPAG. Children need a constant reminder, so that we will have a designated EAL teacher, which is English as an additional language, and she will focus on having teaching specific word classes, features of language techniques, and just having it up so kids can constantly refer to it. So having ED as a past tense rule, but sometimes you might have an irregular verb and that you don't add an ED to it. What types of words are they? When do you use them? How do you use them? These visuals are there consistently throughout the classes as well as the inclusion department. This is an example from the inclusion department. But main classes here in the school that I teach will have a designated area to build children's language, to build their vocabulary, and to kind of help them remember, oh, okay, when we write, the words in red are verbs, they're doing words. I just need to make sure that I know that what doing words are, and so they know how to use it. But also adjectives. Adjectives, something here that they struggle with. I think, I'm not too sure what the Arabic version would be, but again, just knowing that describing the noun means that you use an adjective, and this is how many we use in a piece of writing to upskill our work. But yeah, it's a gentle reminder, it's easy on the eyes, and it's really useful. Next slide, please. And this is my favorite, reading wars. I could talk about this for a very long time. I'm going to try and keep it really short and snappy. But I have 2 displays for reading. I've always had 2 reading displays. The first one to your left is, I follow a scheme. In my first school, we followed a scheme called Destination Reader. And this was about teaching children the skills you need to be able to read. So predicting, being able to pick up a book and say, I know what this book is going to be about because I can look at the clues from the front cover, or being on a page and being able to determine or to guess what's going to happen next in the book, or questioning. You've got I think evaluating, inferring, and making links. These are the skills that we would explicitly teach, and you have the display there, and so there will be a focus for the week, and the kids will be able to point to it and say, okay, we are looking at, for example, in this case it was questioning, and then it says in the middle, if you can see, learning behaviors, and then we'll have a focus of learning behaviors every lesson. So it may be that this lesson I'm going to focus on supporting and actively listening to my partner, or I'm going to discuss and explain, and that's going to be the talking emphasis of this lesson. During these reading sessions, I like to have my children in mixed ability groupings. So I know in some of the questions that were sent during the during the break was, okay, how can you effectively use mixed ability grouping? These are one of the ways that you can do it. Don't limit or pair children up only in their abilities, but actually mix them up, because they will have access or different interpretations of the same text that they can really support one another in, and it's really helpful and impactful. So a reading rule that explicitly teaches reading strategies is very important, and then you just add your post-it notes as you go on of what their thoughts are, or how they can contribute to that piece of learning that week. And it's progressive. Again, you keep it up for as long as it needs to be, and it's easy to refer to. Then you've got the reading area. And so my amazing artist TA, I like to kind of keep what she's created for me and have them up on the wall. So there you have Curious George just sat there on a log, and that's her painting by herself independently. Then you've got Catherine Johnson there just standing on a stool, looking very intelligent. But what you'll find is I don't use a colourful backing for that display. I have a white backing because I want the children to write book reviews, so that another child can feel inspired and say, oh, I want to read that book because that child picked that book up. I usually ask children to pick 2 books, 1 book at their level, but 1 for leisure. And I want to limit them. I don't want to say, this is the level you're at, you're on thin books, only take a thin book. No, I want you to be ambitious with the books that you are choosing. And I'd like for you to pick whichever you want. So 2 books, 1 for your leisure, 1 at the level, just to help you progress at a rapid rate. But yeah, these are 2 display boards that I think are very important. And if we move on to the next slide, Zachary. Visual aids, and Poppy will go into further detail about visual aids. But again, you will have seen me use communicate in print with the writing work, where I would use pictures skillfully that the child with a special learning need will be able to kind of remember a part of the story and then tell it. So that's one way of using it. But you may also use it to kind of remind the child what part of the day that you are at. You can also use these on flashcards. They are godsend, and you can use them really effectively. I'll share this with you. My mother actually works with autistic children, and so she's always got this on a lanyard, and she says if it weren't for these kinds of flashcards, the child that she looks after would never know what the next step is or how to ask something, or the structure or the order of the day. So they are very useful and impactful, and Poppy can explain some more.
Yes, so visuals are incredibly powerful resources. Phil Sands just told us. We also use pictures as an exchange communication system. So children that are maybe too shy to say that they need the toilet, or worried about the amount of time they go to the toilet. I know I had a child that had issues with his toileting. So every day, if he needed the toilet, he'd just go and get the toilet symbol and stick it on the wall by the door. And I'd send him off, Isaiah, off you go to the toilet. And it was a way of him not drawing loads of attention to himself, not having to put his hand up repeatedly, but a really discreet reminder that, Miss Wells, I actually do need a wee now, please send me. And I also wanted to speak about different types of visuals. So social stories can be an incredibly powerful way for children to understand tricky or ambiguous concepts in a way that is a child-centered approach. It puts them in the center of a story. So at the school that I worked at in Thailand, I wanted to make sure that every child that was a new admission to our school felt that they understood our school, that they understood their place in our school, they understood where things were, they understood who was who, and they understood how to get around our school. So we made a new admission social story with pictures of all of the important places in our school, of the staff that they would be engaging with, of who could help them with their reading, who could help them with their understanding of English, who to go to if they were worried or scared, who their class teachers would be. So just a really, really gentle way of settling children into school. And it's something that they could have before arriving. So it's something that would be emailed, or a hard copy would be sent out to their parents. And it was just, I mean, these are only 5 sort of pages from it. There were quite a few more. So my new school, and then a picture of their school. And then Miss Wells and Miss Amina are the teachers in my new classroom. So that's really clear. This is the lunch hall where I can eat my lunch. This is the playground where I can go for break and lunchtime. These are the toilets that I can use at my new school. So just really simple language, but centering the child. And what we found was that children felt they already knew the school a little bit when they came. It made it less daunting, and it made children more comfortable. So that's a really good way that you can use visuals. You can also use social stories for things like if children are going through bereavement, or families are divorcing or separating, really challenging times in children's lives. Putting them at the center of it and viewing it from their perspective not only helps them, but it helps you and the people around them to understand their emotions and their feelings a bit better. This is one of my favorite things. This is called a now and next board. So just to the right of the social story, you can see a now and next board. And they are brilliant for children that struggle with focused attention for prolonged periods of time. So I had a child in my classroom in Thailand who was on the autistic spectrum, and she was obsessed with Peppa Pig. So I knew that any piece of work, now it would be writing, or now it would be science, or now it would be maths, and then it would be Peppa Pig. And she knew that Peppa Pig was only a 5-minute timer break, that she could sit on the iPad, she could either watch an episode of Peppa Pig or flick through endless pictures of Peppa Pig, which she also liked to do. But it meant that her lessons were broken up, and it meant that there was always something to look forward to. So that encouraged her to engage with the learning, to enjoy the learning, because it led to positives. It didn't lead to more sitting down, more listening to the teacher, more having to do the right thing, more not fidgeting. It led to something that was a break and a relief for that child. And honestly, the impact that just using that in a day had on the work that she'd produced the day before and the day we started using that was phenomenal. I remember my TA was pretty blown away because she'd never seen something like a now and next board before. But really simple visuals to remind the child something else is coming next. You know, if you have a more advanced child, then you can have the 3 steps: now, next, and then. Remember, that's constantly changing though, so you constantly need to be moving those visuals along so that the child doesn't get confused. Next slide, please, Zachary.
In the interest of time, we've got about 5 minutes left. We're going to skip that Minty and go straight to here. And then again, I know you all be wrapping up in 5, and then we will be asking for feedback here at the end. So this is a really good question, though. I don't know if it's Philson or if it's Poppy, but how can we develop as reflective practitioners? And the other thing I want to mention is this is going to be covered extensively in our next session with Hannah as well. So this is a taster of more that is to come.
Okay, so this is a really good one, but again, I'm going to try and be as brief as I can. So you've got identification. You want to be able to identify exactly where the need is for the child. However, I think not only do you want to identify the need for the child, you also need to identify what needs you have in order to make sure you're supporting the child to the best of your ability. So I think this is 2 ways. It's identifying the shortcomings in your own practice and being brutally honest, but I think sometimes I take that too far, and Poppy and Zachary will be able to kind of comment on that, but also the areas of need for the child. In order to do so, you need to be really honest, and I'd like to say maybe even brutally honest. Could you have done it better? And if so, how? And then you want to be able to put that in place as soon as possible. Accountability, I mentioned it earlier on in the session. You want to be able to hold yourself to account. These are kind of, you're looking within yourself or your own performance of your job and the role that you've accepted to take. And teaching these children is a huge responsibility. They come into your space every single day. You need to do the best you possibly can for them. Therefore, it's really important that you are holding yourself to account and you're saying, okay, I didn't do the best that I could today. These were the reasons, but it's not going to happen again because I'm going to put X, Y, and Z in place for myself. Do it before you're even told to do it, you know. Compassion, this is another one that I've a good couple of hours with doing me justice with this one. But a lot of these families are dealing with a lot, and Poppy mentioned their circumstances outside of the school, but again, their child having learning needs or special educational needs or disabilities, it may be something that they never expected. And sometimes when I look back at the conversations I've had with mothers, and they talk about their pregnancies, and actually this was part of my research study where I did have interviews with parents, mothers specifically, and I asked them what their journey and experience was like, and they spoke about the fact that they never in a million years expected to have a child that would need such severe needs or have such specific needs. And did it change motherhood for them? Absolutely not. But did it change the way they saw the world? Yes, it did. And how open they were with those around them, and how circumstances affected and impacted how they decided to share their child's needs or teach their child, or what environments they were willing to put their child in, and then they would keep and protect their child from. It's a lot for a parent to take on, and then that parent is bringing their child into our space. Compassion is a massively important aspect of making sure we're reflective practitioners, because they might have a off day where they kind of offload on you and they may be mean, may be unfair, but actually when you look at the grand scheme of things, that mother or father or carer has a lot on their plate. And then act. When you've identified the need and you've been honest with yourself, when you've held yourself to account and you've been compassionate with others and yourself as well, I think it's really important to make sure you're being kind to yourself. You act. Yeah, so if we move on to the next, I think, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Poppy, if we summarize the next couple of slides really briefly, with the summative assessments and kind of looking at their learning, we may have already kind of touched upon it.
Yeah, we've spoken about assessments. We did have a slide on using assessments data to inform your interventions, but I feel that we have covered that quite a bit. So we're going to move on to 5 practical takeaways, because you know, as we said before, that's what we want you to be able to do. Take things that you can use in your classroom. So the number one for me, as Phil-san just said, reflect on your lessons daily. Don't wait to the end of your whole cycle of teaching, you know, a whole unit to reflect. Reflect every day. After each lesson, note down the names of key students or have a discussion or annotate your plan, but just make sure that there is something physical and concrete that you're doing to mark your reflection, so that, you know, we are creatures of habit. We learn by rote. Often we need to just keep doing things again and again by routine. So for me, every day, if I just jotted down on a Post-it note and stuck it on my notice board, the kids that I knew I needed to work with on that concept, they never got left behind. They never got forgotten. So really quick strategy for that. Next slide, please, Zachary. So this is about the differentiation. And these are just two examples. So in my school, we use before, towards, at/deepening. As a way of sort of grouping the children into their attainment levels. Now, this didn't mean that these children had to work in these groups together. It just meant that these were the activities they would be doing while working in their mixed attaining groups, okay? So I'm always thinking about what my learning objective is, but then how that can be hit at different levels. And you'll see that within each level of attainment, there's a challenge. And then within my at/deepening, there's further challenge. But that's because I want all children to be aware that they can challenge themselves. You know, children so often box themselves and say, well, I'm the silly one in the class. I don't know anything, so I can't. No, you can push yourself, and we will push ourselves together. And one thing that I found incredible is the amount of children that would jump from here to here incredibly quickly because they took ownership. When I got higher up the school, we used sort of independent differentiation strategies. So the children took more ownership of their learning and could choose whether they wanted a mild, spicy or hot challenge. I'm going to slide on.
I'm moving on for you because we got 1 minute. But that does make it go faster.
See, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm trying to be really quick. Oracy and social stories are really impactful because, again, you're allowing children to see you speak, allowing you to hear that you think, and there's loads of ways these can be shared. Again, this is another example of how communicating print is used to help children think about the language being used around them. You can use this in storytelling, you can use them in discussing and ideas, and just making sure you've got a really healthy back and forth. And you ask children lots of questions like, tell me how you came to that reasoning, or, you know, can you explain why you thought this? So on and so forth. Again, time's sake, I'm going to say move on because I think we've touched up on this quite a bit.
Structure that oracy into your school day, timetable it in, timetable in daily circle time where you do discuss those things every morning so children can offload. I'm talking at the speed of light right now, but make time for parents, colleagues, make time for everyone around you, because it does pay off. If parents are invested in you as a practitioner, then you have won half the battle. They will want to support their children at home. They want to support you in school. They will follow up with behavioural concerns. But as Heba said earlier, you must have that regular communication so that there aren't unpleasant surprises, so that parents aren't, you know, completely blown aside when you say, I think your child may have specific learning difficulties, because they've never heard any concerns or challenges with their child's academic progress before. And on to the last one, please, Zachary.
Yeah, that being actively seek out information. And this we found again in the results of the study that we were kind of looking at together. There are multiple ways that you can kind of seek out this knowledge so that you're able to kind of upskill yourself and those around them. And these are some of my favorite resources that I tend to go to on a regular basis. So you've got Whole School Send, very important, lots and lots of resources and information there. They also have a YouTube channel where you're able to watch other practitioners explain into greater depth exactly how they try to build an inclusive culture, ethos, environment in their establishments. And so that is a really handy resource. But these 3 books I have, and I really do recommend it because it's a really easy and enjoyable read. And again, it's just about closing the gaps that have clearly grown as well, again, during the pandemic. but it's really handy tips and it's at your hand. So if you can get them, I'd suggest getting them. And then the final, Zachary, if we move on to the next, this was something quite dear to my heart. I recently started this. It is a social enterprise club, but also a social club for some of the children with needs. And I know she won't mind me saying this, but if you look at the left picture, the woman at the far right, she kind of started this initiative, and the idea came to her during a process when she went for a chemo appointment. That's when she got the idea, and she had it in practice and in place within no time. It was a fantastic idea. And the first step was collecting bottle caps. And so she encouraged all the children to collect bottle caps. And we did this in various ways, but time won't allow me to explain how. The next step was making garden beds. And she used those bottle caps. And you'll see in the picture at the top in the middle, you can see the blue. Those were made out of bottle caps in the DT area of the school. The next step was making the organic gardening workshop, where specialists came in and taught children how to garden and what you can grow, what seasons they grow in. And the next step after that was having the farmers market. Now, to maintain the garden beds, what we did is we invited some of the children that needed social, emotional, had those needs, but also needed an opportunity to kind of develop and use the skills that they were learning. And so these are kids from various parts of the primary school, and the workshop is led by children in upper secondary, so year 10s, 11s, and they are able to kind of lead and support the children whilst they're growing this. And at the end of the week, they have herbs such as oregano, you've got your mint sold, you've got okra, they've got so many things that is not coming to my mind now because I'm trying to think really quickly and speak even quicker, but they get to sell it and their parents get to see them selling and buying and interacting, and it's just life skills that they were able to get from an idea she got in the middle of a very important session in her life, and it's been massively impactful for them. And finally, if we move on to the next one, in everything that we've shared with you, we're not allowed to forget to smile. That's what I wanted to end with here. There you go.
But again, this goes back to attitude, right? And I think this is really important as we end. I think in this session we had 30 strategies, 30 practical strategies total. But again, no matter how good or bad your strategies are, if you don't come in with the right attitude, then it doesn't matter. So thank you, Poppy and Phil Son, so much. I am going to, again, stop sharing here. And I'm going to go over and share on our Mentimeter. So if you all could please give your feedback on this session, that would be amazing. We are going to start the next session in about 3 to 5 minutes, but we want to give you some time to give some feedback here. As you could probably noticed, Dr. Myra brought me something chocolatey. I don't know what they are, but they're amazing. And so I keep eating them, which means I keep drinking water, which also means I need to use the washroom here for a second. So what we're going to do is, if you can on Mentimeter, please go in, put down, we got the scale 1 to 4 question, and it'll be the same question as before. We are going to, it's menti.com, and I'll give you, here, I'll put it back in the chat if you do not already have that. It's the same one that we've been using throughout the day, but we understand some people are just getting here. Well, that's quite big font. That's exciting. That'll wake you up. So please take a look there on, how useful you think the session is. We'll give you 1 more minute there. And then, of course, I'm going to ask you what's one thing that you're taking away for sure. Okay, so what's one thing that you're actually going to take away and use? If you want to do some clapping, if you want to give a wave, if you want to put your video on or your microphone on and say really nice things about Phil Son and Poppy, that's great. If you want to send me money, that's fantastic. So any of those things are up.
As well, Zachary, don't be greedy.
No, I'll take you out for like a soda, right? Like I'm happy to give back. So Mentimeter. Okay, so the next thing on the Mentimeter there is what's one thing you've learned from this lesson on inclusive teaching practices. So Hannah is coming up next. We are going to start in 4 minutes. So at 11:40 we will start. So what I'm going to do is leave that slide up. I'm going to turn off my microphone and camera, and Hannah and I will join you in 4 minutes. Again, we know it is good for the brain that even if you don't need to go to the washroom or get more tea, stand up, move around, do a little dance, whatever it is. Appropriate dances, please, but make sure you're getting some movement here. We'll see you in 4 minutes.
Bye-bye.
All right. Hello again, beautiful people. Thank you for the time there. I'm really excited for this last session. Not that I haven't been excited for the other ones because I think they're all good, but Hannah and I have worked together a bit, and she is a brilliant researcher, but more importantly, a brilliant practitioner. And I know she has lots of good stuff coming up. So Hannah, do you want to, again, for those who were not there at the start of the day when we introduced you a bit more with all of our other presenters, Poppy, Phil, Son, and Heba, do you want to just say something about yourself, and then I will share the slides and we'll get started. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. As Zachary mentioned, my name is Hannah Hamid. I'm an assistant head teacher in Senko, what will soon be soon be the largest school in the United Kingdom. It's pretty big. We currently have just over 2,500 students on our roll, and it will soon be over 3,500 students. We are split across 4 sites, and we have a primary school, and I'm based across all sites, and I lead on inclusion and special educational needs within the school. I'm also very lucky to work with Zachary and be one of his PhD doctoral students.
Basically, what that means is she tells me what to do and I do it. It's nice that I'm supervising her, but we both know that's not true because Hannah's incredible. And she has a lot of experience in this area, including a master's degree looking at some of the work that we're about to discuss. So Hannah, tell me when you want me to move forward, and it's all yours. Ready to go.
So this session will be focusing on culturally responsive reflective practice. And I'll break it down into 3 key topics. However, the sessions that we had this morning on parental involvement and inclusive practice really tie into what we're about to discuss here, because ultimately reflection permeates every aspect of your practice. You need to be a reflective practitioner in order to really develop and enhance that parental involvement, to really develop and enhance the inclusive practices within your school. And it's such an important concept that at times can be forgotten, but it really does enable you to grow as a practitioner. So the first aspect will be the psychological safety and self-awareness, why they matter, how they impact culturally responsive reflective practice, and what you can do within your current setting to develop them further. Then we'll take a look at culturally responsive reflective practice, the individual. You, what do you do? How can you develop it further? And then the organisation, because we all work within organisations, we're part of a community. So what can we do to develop our responsive practice further, and how can we lean on each other to ensure that we're getting the best out of our students and our colleagues? Next slide, please, Zachary. So my first question to you is, who are you? Who are you? What makes you you? This is a really important question that's been slightly touched upon earlier today, when Zachary mentioned, would you want to learn from you? It's a question that I think at times, I know when I tried to answer it about myself, I found it quite difficult. It was, wait, who am I? And the first things that came to mind were, this is my job, I'm a teacher, and this is my age. But I realized that's actually not, the essence of who I am as an individual. Who we are as individuals, how we interact with others, our likes, our interests, impact our behaviours and our practice. It's really important to really reflect upon who we are as individuals, our personalities, idiosyncrasies, and our cultures. They're reflected in our words and actions. And it's something that's really beautiful, especially when we're working with others. We learn from others, but we need to really understand the essence of who we are, especially when dealing with others. So this activity, I don't want you to share your responses, but I do want you to just jot down 3 adjectives or phrases that you feel are at the essence of who you are. And we'll come back to this later on, but how do they help you in engaging with the world around you? Do you make judgments on others based on what you see, what you hear, what you assume about them? Keep those questions to mind. Don't share them, but just hold on to them for now. And we will come back to them later on this session.
I'm going to interject real quick, if you don't mind, Anna, because I think this is a really important question. Again, and if people say, who are you? It's, I do this for a living, or I'm a parent of this. But I heard someone say at one point, and I thought it was the most eloquent way of asking this question or saying this, could you find your soul in the darkness? Now, I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it, because who are you? I mean, if we think of ourselves as beings in general, it's not just titles. Could you find your soul in the darkness? And I think, what would you be looking for? And I think these kind of adjectives are some of the things that we would be looking for. So I think it's a brilliant question, and not one that I hope the audience just kind of skates past, because this is really critical to everything we do. So I'll put that that question in the chat. But just before we go on, I hope that you all will really take that seriously. What are those 3 adjectives? What would you look for if the lights went out and you couldn't describe your titles, your roles in life? Who's your soul? Could you find it in the darkness? Thank you.
It's a really profound way of putting it, Zachary, and it's really got me thinking, could I find my soul in the darkness? Before I share the next slide with you, it's a slide where we asked this question. Within my school, we have a unit within English where we look at seminal world literature, and identity is a key aspect of that, where we really engage with young people in terms of their identity. And during adolescence, I predominantly work within the secondary school, but I do support, I'm the Senko of the primary as well. But working with adolescents, this is a pivotal moment in their lives where they're trying to establish and find out who they are and their identity. So it was not just for educational purposes that, you know, the seminal world literature, but it had a social emotional benefit to it in supporting these young people, in understanding not only who they were and their cultural background, their ethnicity, their identity, but those of others. Next slide, please, Zachary. So this is an example of some of the responses, and I'm not too sure if you can see it quite clearly, but you can see at the top, one of the titles is "Who am I? An explanation of identity." And these are quite profound questions we're asking. These are students in year 7 that are 11 years old, 12 years old. But it's quite beautiful, actually, how they capture themselves and how they articulate it and how they describe themselves, because they're at a point in their lives that they don't have a career. They're not going to write down, I'm a teacher, or, you know, I'm a gardener, I do this, I do that. It's more, this is who I am, my faith, you know, adjectives like unique, that I'm sensitive, that I'm caring, I'm thoughtful. But not only did we get them to really engage with that aspect of it, but you'll see in green, there is some writing there. We got them to engage with other students. So other students came, they read their work, they asked them questions about their identity, and then they wrote responses. And this enabled them to really understand each other on a deeper level, and understanding your peers is, you know, that psychological safety of actually working together and feeling safe around other students to say, this is who I am, this is my unique, authentic self. And young people do it so beautifully. But when I did this activity with teachers within my school, it was quite challenging. They found it incredibly challenging to really get to the essence of actually how would I describe myself. But it is crucial, because you as an individual, you're a human being and you are working with other human beings. That connection, how you portray yourself, how the impression you give, the language you use, all of that has an impact on that young person. They soak up everything you say, how you interact with them, how you make them feel, and your identity and who you are, aspects of that. Next slide, please, Zachary. So identity, I just mentioned that. And the key reason I've got this slide up is to share with you a podcast. I don't really listen to podcasts. I'm a very visual person, but this podcast is probably I think it's the second podcast I've ever listened to. And it was phenomenal. It's by a man called Stephen Bartlett, and it's called The Diary of a CEO. But he had a guest on this podcast called Mo Godat, and he's an Egyptian businessman who was the previous chief business officer at Google X. So he had a fantastic career, really successful. He also wrote a book called The Soul of Happy, and he starts off the podcast. He's asked, what has made you successful? What has led to all of this? And he starts it off by expressing he grew up in Egypt and he spent half his life there. But he was working in the States and traveling between East and West. And he expresses the thing that shapes him was that he was born in the East, raised in the East. He was, brought up with the culture of the East, but was educated in the West, but also raised in the West with the culture of the West. And there was so much value to learn from the various cultures. And he embraced both of them and took elements from each one. And this really enabled him to translate concepts that would normally be spoken about in one more than the other. And the key reason this really stood out to me, especially, with this session coming up, is that we're all in a position where we're exposed to students, and it could be students from many different cultures, many different backgrounds, life experiences. And you all have the opportunity to enrich their lives. You have the opportunity to add value to their lives in such a unique way, where you are soaking up all of these various cultures. You are there to facilitate their learning. You're there to facilitate their growth, not just academically, but as citizens of this world and as individuals that will go on to hopefully be really successful within the world. But it just really struck a chord for me that actually there's so much that we can learn from those that we work with. And, you know, that I think it was mentioned earlier by Hibba in terms of that hierarchy, the power dynamics of you being the teacher, the authority there, that those students are people, they're human beings. And actually that's at the heart of it. It's not considering, actually, I'm here to tell you what to do. You're there to work with them. You're there to learn from them. And some of the most brilliant teachers I've ever come across are those that engage with that and those that say, I learned something from that child. That child taught me this today. And I'm not talking they taught you about quantum physics, but, you know, they could do. But it's those interactions and how we build those relationships and what we learn from those young people. Next slide, please, Zachary. So this next part, if any of you recognize the car, then it's, I can't send you money, but you'll get a high five from me. So if you do and you put it in the chat, I'm going to be really impressed. Sorry, Zachary, can you just click on the slide? So the first thing I want you to do is to reflect upon, yes, oh no, Poppy, that's cheating. That's cheating. You can't take part, Poppy. But the first thing I want you to think about is reflect upon the last week. If you could change anything at all, what would you change? I don't just mean in terms of your teaching practice, in terms of life. Could be a conversation you had with, you know, your partner, your child, somebody at the supermarket. What would you change about it? Next, click again, please, Zachary. Now consider your interactions with people over the last week. What would you change and why? And the last one. Oh, sorry, back us. Yeah. What do you need in place to enable you to do this? This is such a crucial question because we get asked the, you know, what would you change? Why? How, you know, what would you change? But actually, what do you need to enable you to do this? What did you need if you had a conversation with a colleague or with your line manager or with a student that didn't go well? What did you need for it, upon reflection, for it to go well? What is it that you needed? Was it whether it was support, whether it was just time or space to really consider and think about what your response would be? Now, the reason I started off with looking at identity, looking at who you are and this activity is all of these impact and really resonate when it comes to reflective practice. They really impact our beliefs, and our belief systems impact our interactions with others, how we reflect, what we reflect upon. Because it's not just that, oh, you're a reflective practitioner. What are you reflecting upon? You might just be reflecting upon how the children responded and not what you have done. Because actually, these things go hand in hand. You need to ensure that you are actively reflecting holistically. And that is going to really tie us into the next part, which is the first topic we're going to look at. So next slide, please, Zachary. Psychological safety and self-efficacy. Can I just get a thumbs up if you've heard of either one of these terms before, or if you've got any understanding of what psychological safety is or self-efficacy? So I've had 2, 3, 4. So we've got quite a few thumbs up going up, which is great. For those of you that haven't come across these terms, these are, you know, especially the psychological safety, I think that's something that has really defined and shaped a lot of my practice currently. So move on to the next slide, please, Zachary. So psychological safety is a construct, a theoretical framework construct that describes how you as an individual, us as individuals, how our belief that how others will respond when we put ourselves on the line. So what I mean by that is, if I decided now I'm going to do a quiz for you all, and I was like, cameras on, mics on, and I wanted you to respond right now. Some of you might feel a bit anxious. There might be that fear. I might just pick on Zachary now and ask him, I want you to break down Edmondson's theory of psychological safety to me right now. And I don't know if you just saw his face there, but there was an element of fear or that panic of, oh my God, what right now? Psychological safety goes back to feeling safe to put yourself out on the line, feeling safe to contribute, to make mistakes. It's about learning from those errors, seeing them as opportunities. And one really crucial thing here is focus on the opportunity for growth, not on the error. We all make errors, and that is actually, it's such a natural thing. We all make mistakes, and that is a natural thing. And it's about removing that fear for our young people. And with this, I really want us to focus not just on learners, but on the staff that we work with as well. Create that safe space. So learning from errors is a key aspect here. Openly discussing mistakes, having that open conversation where, do you know what, Zachary, I really messed up with that systematic review that I'm doing. I did this, this, and this. Can I have some help? Asking for that help, feeling safe to make those mistakes, and feeling safe sharing ideas. I know quite early on in my career, I was incredibly anxious actually to share any ideas, because I thought people would shoot them down. They'd say, oh, you've just started teaching, what do you know? Or that, you know, it'd be a really stupid, obvious idea. And I'd have comments like, oh, that's, you know, really obvious. We've already done that. But it's important to have those conversations. If somebody's already done that, or it's an idea that's already shared, it's actually still, you know, celebrating the effort that individuals make. And when it comes to the classroom, it's ensuring that you are creating a caring, supportive environment, that students within your classroom are happy, comfortable, and will engage within the lesson, because they're not scared to make a mistake. They're not scared of your reaction as a practitioner, as their teacher. Yes, boss.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so in those last comments on the Mentimeter, someone even said that. They said, well, these are, you know, some of these things are things that I should have learned in year 2 and that by a third year teacher should know. And I understand maybe the mindset of good for you because you know those things, but it's important to remember that not everyone does know some of the strategies, but more importantly than that, this goes back to what are we entering the class with from a mindset perspective. If we enter a chat room with those kinds of things, how are our kids supposed to feel when they make a mistake or when there's something they don't know? If you're an inclusive lead, or if you're training other teachers and you enter this like everyone should know that, that's not enabling a place where your teachers nor your students are going to feel comfortable making mistakes. And Poppy and Philson hit on this, and Hannah's hitting on this. This idea that it is okay to not do everything perfect is really critical. And so we've got to, I think this is so important that you're talking about this here, Hannah, because this idea of creating an environment, and that environment starts with us, right? Feeling safe in our own skin. And then we can allow others to feel safe too. But I did want to address that comment, because I do agree. A lot of the stuff that Philson and Poppy talked about is really good stuff that should be used. At the same time, it's okay if it's not, right? And that's why we're here today, and that's why we're sitting, is to learn together. So fantastic point there, Hannah, about the importance of making sure that not only ourselves, but we promote an environment that is psychologically safe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think within that environment, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, one thing that I will say, and it might be a bit controversial, and I hope it's not, but nobody here knows everything. Nobody here knows everything about education or special educational needs or inclusive practice. This is a continuously evolving field, and there's so much that we're still discovering. Even, you know, psychology is still in its early days. There's so much to still learn within the field that we all work in. I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt you, because a really good comment just came up, and this is something I'm really, really passionate about. I think it's Layla. I hope I'm saying your name right. It might be Lila. How to balance psychological safety and real safety. How can we train students to deal with real life and feel safe at the same time? So here's the thing. I'm sure that all of you in some capacity have heard about grit or persistence or growth mindset, right? This idea that our kids are, some people call this the strawberry generation. They look really pretty, but you touch them and they bruise. You know what I mean? They're not able to actually adapt and move forward. And what we're talking about here is this is exactly it. How are they going to develop grit or persistence or resilience if we don't give them a chance to fail? And so
physical safety, obviously our first thing has to make sure our kids are physically safe, right? But this idea of emotional and psychological safety, some of that occurs simply when we allow them to make mistakes. Or to go back to a couple of the examples that we used earlier, when we make mistakes in front of them and we say, well, you know, I made a mistake. One of the best things about everybody starting to adopt with technology is that technology is really clear if you make a mistake or not, right? And there's two ways to respond to it. We can either throw the device to the side and say, I hate technology, it's the worst thing ever, it never works. Or we can say, you know what, that didn't work, we'll try it again tomorrow. Or, you know what, that maybe there's a better application, or maybe there's a better thing. But how we respond to it in real time as teachers allows them to see, oh, now that's grit, that's resilience. It allows them to see a role model. And I think this is really, really, really critical. We have to create that environment where they can fail and get back up, because that's grit and resilience. And that is where this whole idea of psychological safety comes in. I'm sorry, Hannah, I just saw that question and I wanted to hit it really, really, because it is absolutely critical. It's a fantastic question. But one of the things we have to remember is the way that they develop it is by watching us. By watching us fail, by watching us understand we don't know everything, by watching us understand that we're going to make mistakes too. That's really, really important. Sorry to interrupt again, Hannah. And I know
you do your thing, Zachary.
But
and I've just noticed another question come up with regards to how do I make students have psychological safety when it comes to bullying and peers? And I was just about to touch upon psychological safety from peers. Again, that comes down to you and the environment that you create. And I'll give you an example. I teach a class where it's quite mixed in terms of social skills. So we've got some students that are incredibly confident with their social skills, quite popular, and other individuals that don't feel very confident with their social skills and feel quite intimidated being around those students. And this is a lower prior attaining class. It's I teach them specialist skills like metacognitive strategies and how to utilize them. And one of the key things, it is my responsibility to create that psychological safety. It is my responsibility to ensure that all of them feel safe. And I've very clear routines, very clear rules with regards to, and Poppy touched upon this earlier on in terms of the no laughing. We don't laugh at each other only if it's a shared joke. So it's ensuring actually you've created and facilitated a space where behaviours like that are not reinforced in the sense that actually, you know, you're reinforcing the positive behaviours, you're reinforcing that kindness principle, you're speaking to those people and young people and developing relationships with them to understand actually why are you doing that, why are you speaking to that young person that way, so that you're supporting them in understanding their behaviours. Because if they're bullying their peers, there's something there that you need to work with, and something, you need to support that young person in understanding what is happening there, so that it can be the root of these actions can be dealt with as well. But having very clear, consistent rules, practices in your classroom. We celebrate. We don't the language you use. So, for example, I don't use the word wrong. We don't use language like that within my classroom. We celebrate effort. And I'm going to touch upon growth mindset and Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of how we utilize them, so that you can develop this later on in the session. But it's really ensuring that they feel safe enough to actually tell you as well. They feel safe enough to say, Miss, this is happening. And all of that comes back down to what you are doing in your classroom, the language you use, the routines that you've got in place, and addressing those behaviours that lead to bullying as well. And I would happily talk about, I could do a whole hour and a half, 2 hours, a whole day, week, month on psychological safety. And I'll give you an example of how I've utilised it with staff shortly. But it is a concept that I would strongly encourage you to look into in terms of how you can further develop it within your practices. I don't think I've got enough time today to do so. Next slide, please, Zachary. So the next thing is self-efficacy, and this ties in with psychological safety, and it's Bandura's model of self-efficacy. So it's essentially expressing that behaviour is impacted by your own belief in your abilities and the strength of that belief as well. So if you've got to do a session like today, you might go into the session thinking, yeah, I can do this. But how strongly do you believe that? How strongly did I believe actually I can sit for an hour and a half and have this discussion and support colleagues and practitioners with this. It's that strength in your belief. And it comes down to, we're going to talk about these 4 key areas. So mastery experiences. So this refers to actually gaining new experiences, performance outcomes and gaining new experiences. So look at challenges. So for example, if you struggle with dyslexia, supporting students with dyslexia, and you know that's an area for development for you, that's a challenge. Don't see it as that's my weakness, that's the thing I can't do. See it as this is a challenge for me. Find somebody that is good at supporting students with dyslexia, work with them, understand, master that area of development for yourself in order to build that confidence. And that ties into the vicarious experiences, observing others. This is such an important aspect of our practice as teachers and working together to collaboratively develop our skills further. Observe others that are successful and have a strength in an area that you would like further development in. That social persuasion ties into this as well, because it's finding those positive role models, finding those teachers that you can work with, that you can look up to. And it doesn't have to be just someone within your workplace. It could be, I listen to quite a few TED Talks and I find them quite inspiring. I talk to individuals, practitioners outside of my school. I'm part of a forum, which I think has really shaped my practice as well, that's outside of my school, that is other fellow leaders within SEN, because I know I don't know everything. None of us know everything. And actually it's about, well, what do you do? How do you do that? How can I develop that further? Because that is an area of development for me. And then the physiological and emotional states. So thinking about how these experiences can shape those emotional and physiological states in you, whether it's the anxiety, whether it's the sweating, the nervousness. I talk, as you've probably noticed, I talk really fast when I'm nervous. So if I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down. But ensuring that you're actually taking note of these things and reflecting on how you can develop your self-efficacy. Next slide, please, Zachary. So how does this impact reflective practice? It does a lot. And the reasons for it are, if we don't feel safe enough to ask questions, to be our authentic self, to make mistakes, that doesn't leave room for growth. If we don't feel confident enough to observe others, to ask for help, or to learn a new skill, that doesn't leave room for growth. We need to ensure that those fundamental aspects are in place so that we can grow and develop as individuals, and that we are brutally self-reflective, not to the point, as I know Phil San mentioned this earlier about herself. I mean, don't make yourself cry every night. I don't mean brutally in that sense. I mean, you've got to be really honest with yourself. You've got to think, okay, these are the things that I do know, but there's a lot more that I can get to know, and how can I do this, and how can I implement it within my practice? And I'm going to give you an example, actually, of where I noticed it within my practice and what I did, so that you've got another practical example to go away with. Within my school, we have 600, currently we have 600, that will increase every year for the next 4 years. We currently have 600 students that join us every year. So for some schools, that is a whole school. And with having such a large cohort like that, it results, we do have a large number of students with special educational needs, or children of determination, and a large number of students with English as an additional language, as we are in an incredibly diverse area within London in terms of ethnicities. And my school, as soon as we saw our intake increase, we saw an increase in the number of students with SEN and EAL within our cohorts. And what I started to see was that teachers were not utilising the strategies that were in place consistently across the board. And as my role as the leader for Inclusion SEN, I was, observing, carrying out my audits, and I was noticing actually teachers aren't utilising this, but also they're feeling really overwhelmed. They're feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And that was something that really enabled me to put in place this strategy. I then decided to put in place something called Sen Strategy Meetings. And what I did is I would look at particular classes where there was a trend, or a particular student that teachers were really struggling with. And I asked all of those teachers to meet with me. And the one thing I did not want it to be was a meeting where we're just sitting there discussing how bad everything is, or a meeting that is a meeting for the sake of a meeting that could have been an email, because that is counterproductive, a waste of everyone's time, and everyone will then leave the session thinking, I got nothing from that at all. And I want people to leave thinking, oh, I feel a bit better. Oh, this is one thing that I can do. So the focus of this strategy meeting, I was there to facilitate, and that is really important for anyone that tries to do this. You're there as a facilitator. You need to create a psychologically safe space for people so that actually they can actively share. I'm really struggling with this, Hannah. I don't know how to differentiate for this class. There's so many different needs and I don't know what I'm doing. Hannah, you know what? I really am struggling with the social, emotional, mental health needs within this class. There's a number of students and the behaviours manifesting are really challenging. So I took myself out of the equation to a certain degree and I let them speak to each other. And not only created psychological safety, because a lot of them realised, you feel that too. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, okay. And then by my facilitation, look, it was more in the sense of, I asked questions. So I had just three questions that I would ask. What is working right now? If it isn't broken, don't fix it. There's so many things that work well that, we have this negative bias at times where we focus on what isn't working, when there could be 5 things that are going well and only one thing that isn't quite going as you'd imagined. I asked them, what is going well? What is really working for you within this lesson, within this class, with this pupil? And as they're talking amongst themselves, I'm typing this up. I'm typing up everything they're saying. Then I said to them, what needs to develop? So what needs to develop? And it's not what isn't working, what's rubbish. The language we use is so important with practitioners and with students. So it's what needs to develop further. So they were telling me, actually, this needs to develop further. And that enabled me to highlight areas that maybe teachers were struggling with. Then the final thing was, what are our next actions? They needed to leave with something they could do, so that actually they felt empowered going into those lessons or working with those pupils. And we collaboratively, at this point I did support a little, but collaboratively came up with an action plan. And not only did it enable us to implement it universally, because I knew every teacher that taught that class was there. So, and sorry, this is for the secondary school, for those of you that are primary school teachers. So every teacher was then able to implement it because they were all there, they all contributed, they all had a voice, and they were all left with an action plan. So it was consistent and it was universal. And what I started doing was slowly checking in, but not checking in on the progress of the teachers. I was checking in on how they felt. I was making sure actually I was trying to develop that psychological safety so that they could ask for more help, so that actually they could make mistakes and they felt empowered teaching these young people. So that is one strategy that you could utilize within your practice to really develop that psychological safety and self-efficacy, because it does develop that self-efficacy, that confidence. Yes, Zachary.
No, I want to come back real quick to something, because I know we've only got about 15 minutes and we've got a lot to get through, but this is a really important point. The research shows that for every 7 positive comments, it takes 1 negative comment to offset all of those. And so even like in some of the reviews that we'll get from this, it's very easy to focus on like, oh, well, that one thing, you know what I mean? When 95% of the students, or 95% of a thing that a kid could be doing could be really good. So I love this idea, Hannah, of going back to teachers and saying, okay, so tell me everything that's going well with it. Because it's important for us to reset that mindset, because it is so easy to look at that one negative and ignore the 7 other positives that were going on. So thank you for pointing that out. I just think it's a really important point. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, and it's something that I had to, that actually my reflective practice led me to, because it was, I started off, I know, when I first became Senko, I'd kind of look for what isn't going well. And then I really quickly reframed my thinking that actually this child is doing so much, there's so much good happening here, and there's so much great practice. And by really emphasizing the good practice and the progress and the successes, it really enables people to focus on the positives more, but you're building on what's already there. No need to reinvent the world. Build on the good that's there. Build on the good practice. And that will really support with the psychological safety and self-efficacy. Next slide, please, Zachary. So I was going to share a whiteboard with you, and I don't know if this is going to work, So it might be that we use the chat function for this. But I do want some active participation here, and I really want you to really consider and think about how can you create psychological safety in your setting. Just one thing that you can do. And the second question, I want you to keep that to yourself, because actually that's a personal growth target. That's for you to really think about. But the first one is, how can you create psychological safety in your setting?
Let's put those in the chat if that's okay. If you could
So
put it in the chat. Let's wait, and we need to get at least 5 comments before we move on. So five people commenting on that right there. We got one in.
Let's see who feels psychologically safe enough to contribute. Don't worry, I'm not scary, I promise. So we've got tone of voice, which is a great one. I think how we speak to people is really important. That constant reflection on self, definitely, because that enables us to really pinpoint areas of ourselves that need development and what we're doing in the classroom to enable others to feel safe. 3 more. Can we get 3 more?
You can put it in Arabic if it's easier.
Be yourself. I love that. Be yourself, definitely. This is, I spoke to teachers at they're already coming in now. Create careful wording when responding, definitely. Create boundaries, yep. By talking about family, friends, or student, yes. Create a non-judgmental space for student. All fantastic comments and suggestions. And I think what you've really touched upon there is relationship. And this is something I say to teachers that I work with all the time. You're working with human beings, you're working with other individuals. It's not, you've got to at times just think to yourself, how am I building a relationship with this human being, not just with this student? Am I listening to their interests? Am I taking note of how they feel within my lessons? Am I, what do they like? What don't they like? How am I incorporating that? Being sensitive, showing empathy, communication, all brilliant suggestions. So really think about actually what you're going to do within your classroom consistently. Doing this once doesn't make a profound difference to your teaching practice within the classroom. It's doing it every single time. And when you do something, you've got to build those routines where actually your students show up to your lesson, they're like, yes, I've got Mr. Walker, or yes, I've got Miss Hamid. I can't wait for this lesson. You want that excitement because they feel safe. They feel excited to come and share and support and learn. Next slide, please, Zachary. How do I do this? Often when I go to CPD sessions or training sessions and I have somebody talking at me, I'm really sorry, everyone. I do sometimes think, okay, but tell me, how can I do this? And I used to think that a lot. How can I do this? What does this look like? The strategy meeting. So create judgment-free spaces in your classroom with your colleagues and students. So that's what I want to add, and students there. Have the strategy meetings in place. Speak to your students. Start off the lesson with, what did you do over the weekend? Anybody reading any good books? Anybody watching anything? Speak about something that isn't school related to really build that relationship with them, and have those clear rules in place when it comes to, like Poppy said, we don't laugh at each other. We laugh at jokes that we're all part of. Perceive mistakes as learning experiences, positive, reflective questioning. Really think about actually how you're reframing, shaping, and perceiving these learning experiences. As I said, that these are opportunities for growth. Don't focus on them as just an error. It's actually, what can I do further? And it's that reflective question. What can I do further? How can I develop this further? Create opportunities for feedback from your pupils and stakeholders. And I'll show you some examples of that shortly. Identify areas of strength and develop them and development and develop them further. This can be quite challenging at times. I was recently interviewing some assistant head teachers for a position at my school, and it was an assessment day with a range of activities. And one thing, at the end of the day, I really like to ask the participants, how do you think that went? Or, what did you really enjoy? Or what do you think went really well? Just to get, have a conversation with them and get a better understanding of their views and their own reflective practice. And I recall one of them expressing that they thought, you know, the lesson was the best part because it was one of the best, you know, parts of a lesson they'd ever taught. And I sat there and, you know, I was having that conversation, but for me, that was, you know, that was quite possibly the area that they performed. That wasn't their strongest area because there was a lot missing for those particular pupils with additional needs. And it really made me think how often perception, and this again, I'll talk about this later on, but perception impacts our reflection at times, and why it's important to observe others, why it's important to get others to observe you, because I could talk to you about all my flaws and Zachary could give you a list of some that I didn't even, you know, that I didn't even realize. And it's not to critique, it's not to be critical, it's not to bring someone down. It's all about development and looking at the areas of development for us. Incorporating cultural diversity into the curriculum, that enables young people to feel this sense of belonging, this sense of safety, where they do feel, I belong in this community, I belong in this school, in this classroom. Next, one last thing, sorry, before we move on. One thing I want to do, and that's linked to the first one, the create judgment-free spaces and creating that positive climate for your students. I mentioned earlier that I don't say that's wrong. When we're responding to questions, we do this. Thumbs up means agree. Crossing their arms means challenge. They want to challenge something. And arms up like this means expand. And if their arms are down, it means they don't know, or they're unsure, they're stuck. But this is a great way in terms of assessment for learning, but it also creates that safe space where actually we're all contributing. There's nothing wrong. Nobody's saying your answer's wrong. We're saying, oh, we're going to challenge it. And they make sound effects to make it more interactive. But it also, in terms of assessment for learning, enables them to expand, because they might think, yeah, I do agree with what, you know, Phil San's saying, but I want to expand on it and add this and add that. And it really supports them, and they love it because we've got sound effects where they're like ding, 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 or shh. My sound effects are rubbish, but you get the gist of it. So really ensuring that actually there's this interactive element where it's not just hands up, hands down, it's everyone's involved. And if their arms are down, that's them signaling, I'm not quite sure. And it gives them an opportunity to listen and to really build upon their knowledge from their peers. Sorry, Zachary, now we can move on. So I've got here some examples. So how can we do this? Listening, feedback is important. It's really crucial. And what we have here is we put in place a pupil voice survey, a staff survey, and a parent-carer feedback survey. And all of these surveys really inform what we do. We are children-focused, family-focused, staff-focused, and that we work together, we collaborate, we work together, and we listen. We take on board what the young people want, what staff need and want, as well as what parents need and want. And we ensure that we're working together to support them and creating, again, that psychological safety, because they feel I'm being listened to here. This is a space where actually my needs are being met as well. So the pupil survey, I do that at the start of the year, and then I'll do it at the end of the year. And it's not just about their happiness or what they, you know, if they like coming to school, but it's what do they want more of? What would they, you know, what engages them in their learning? What are they most proud of? That's the question I love on this survey. What are you most proud of this year? The Sen staff feedback, again, that's to really ascertain how psychologically safe staff feel. Are they aware of all the different needs? And it's judgment free. If somebody said no, they weren't. This, you know, it wouldn't be me coming into them saying, why aren't you? You've been teaching for 5 years. You should know this. It's okay. That's fine. Okay, how can I support you? How can we get to where you need to be? But also it's identifying areas of development that they want and need. And this actually really supported the training that I put in place last year. What came from this was that social, emotional, mental health needs was an area that a significant number of staff wanted support and training on. So I created some sessions where I brought in some speakers, the educational psychologist, a range of individuals that came in and did sessions with staff. And this was all staff that were involved in this. And the feedback from that, and actually the interaction and engagement we have now with staff and the SEND department is the best it's ever been, because they feel listened to. They don't feel judged. It's okay to say, Hannah, I've got no idea how to do this. How do I support this student with dyslexia? And Lastly, the send parent carer feedback forms. We're really big on, just as Hibba mentioned earlier, parental involvement is really crucial. And as Zachary said, they are that child's first teacher. So it's ensuring that we're putting in place support for them, because it is quite overwhelming for many parents, I'm sure, that have young people that do have additional needs, and you've got all these meetings to attend at school or appointments to attend. Ensuring that they feel listened to, they're supported, and that we're putting in place sessions that they want. And again, we had an overwhelming response from parents with this Google form, and we created some sessions, and this lasted a term and a half. It was every Tuesday after school. There was tea, biscuits, and we'd have the speakers come in, and the sessions were an hour long. The parents would stay. They'd be from 3:30 to 4:30. The parents would stay until the caretaker would kick us out. So I'd have the caretaker knocking on the door saying, "You all need to leave now, I need to lock the school," because it gave them not just additional knowledge, but a forum for discussion, a forum to say, "Oh, I am really struggling with this," or speaking to another parent. And this is a strategy that is free, you know, as in terms of the Google Forms, the feedback, it's free. Go onto Google, create a Google form. It will give you a link. You can either text that out to parents or email it. Same with staff, put it into a Google Classroom if you use Google within school. But it enables you to really capture the voices of so many different people. I've got the slide in there, the image from the first, the identity unit with pupils, and the two pictures at the side. I've got to put my hands up. I stole them off of Google because I didn't have time to go into my school and actually take a picture of the displays that we have that are exactly like this. So Google can take credit for that, or whoever added them to Google. But recognizing, celebrating, and ensuring that representation is there, the all about me, so that students feel they're part of the community, celebrating their cultures as well. That all ties into that psychological safety, because it's feeling safe, it's feeling heard, it's feeling part of something, it's that belonging.
Okay,
right,
so I'm just going to interject here. We're going to go about, Hannah, if we can go about 13 more minutes, and then I'll summarize, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end where Phil Son and Popeye will join us, or Popeye will join us as well. And we can do any kind of Q&As. We can do any live things that anyone wants to do. So if you have about 13 more minutes, if that's okay. And if we need to skip the video, we can, or if you want to play it, that's fine. And then what we'll do is, if we do want to have an open conversation, we can do it at that point after I do a little bit of a summary. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we're on the right time and everyone on the audience knows what's going on.
Perfect. So next slide. Right, so what does a reflective practice look like to you? Again, I just want you to think about this. And one thing that I will say here is, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, improve it, evolve it, develop it. Look at what is already in place, use that as your starting point, and really try to develop that further. Think about what influences how you consider situations and people. What questions do you ask yourself? Next slide, Zachary. So I'm going to race through this now. So this next video, I will post a link to this in the chat, but it's a brilliant video on a reflective mindset, but it really focuses on the cultural aspect and the culturally responsive aspect. And I have taken, if you go on to the next slide, Zachary, I've got here just an excerpt from that, and something that Ali mentions within it, and how we think about ourselves and how we think about others deeply affects our behaviors, our performance, and even our physiology. This hopefully ties in some of what we've already discussed already. How we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others impacts how we speak, impacts what we do, impacts our perception of situations, how we interact with others as well. So you may think, well, how is this really linked to reflective practice? But it is, because having that familiarity and oneness with the environment around us really supports us and enables us to connect, and really thinking about how we connect. Do we connect with the individuals around us? And removing the aspects of, I think it was Brene Brown that really comments on the not fitting into the environment, that it's this whole concept. And I speak to the young people that I teach a lot about, you shouldn't be trying to fit in here, It's like, how does the world around you fit in with you? You know, you don't need to change who you are to fit in here. And that really develops their self-efficacy as well. Sorry, next slide. Right, so when it comes to the individual and considering your reflective practice, I've got 2 models of reflection here, and you feel free to take a picture should you wish to. And I'm going to go into more detail in terms of Kolb's reflective model. But one thing I do want to touch upon, and you know, when Poppy and Phil Sand discuss the graduated approach, one thing to be really mindful of here is you change, your kids change, your staff change occurs around you. So completing this cycle once is not sufficient, because as you complete that cycle, it's like the world continues spinning, change continues happening. That young person will not be where they are now. They're not, you know, where they are now will not be where they are in a year's time, whether it's socially, emotionally, or academically. And the same with you. You know, I'm not the person I was 2 years ago. So that change, you know, want to ensure that we're factoring actually that change into these reflective models as well. And you want to retrain your brain. You want to develop those neural pathways that really support that reflective practice and the questions that you ask yourself. Next slide, please, Zachary. So what does this look like? I had a student with English as an additional language and special educational needs. He came to the school from Russia, and it was actually quite a traumatizing trip for him to come into the UK and come into the school, because he thought he was coming here on holiday, but his family had moved here. So there was a lot of trauma for him that was involved with the move. And when he joined me, there was a lot of times where there wasn't a sense of you know, him really feeling like he was engaging, he didn't feel like he belonged. So here's an example of how I used Gibbs's model. So the first aspect is the description. So this is me describing to you what happened. The next is the feelings. This is how I felt. I felt like I was failing him. I felt like nothing I was doing was working. Whether I had visual, you know, stimulus up on the board, whether I tried engaging with him, it just wasn't working. Next aspect is the evaluation. So I evaluated, okay, what's going so well, what isn't going so well. So good, he's listening, you know, he's actually listening, but he's not learning, he doesn't seem happy. So then it was the analysis, and I thought, okay, I need to connect with him as a person and understand him better. I need to develop that relationship. And that led to the conclusion, which I realized I'm going to try and build a connection and relationship with him so that he feels safe in my classroom, because that goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of the physiological, that feeling of safety within the settings that we're in. And then lastly, the action plan. I realized, you know what, in order to make him feel safe, I want to connect to his culture, to him as an individual. So I looked into popular culture in Russia. I had no idea what I was talking about, but he found it funny that I was even trying to pronounce certain words, and that I, you know, had even brought certain things up. And it was the first time I'd actually seen him smile in 3 months. So I ensured that I had a tablet in his lessons with Immersive Reader, and I'll show you what that's in a moment. And I spent the first few minutes of every lesson talking to him about his interests. And we'd use Immersive Reader to translate for us as well. And it got to a point where he was using language more, and he'd have conversations, and he'd even wave at me in the corridor. That was a high point for me, the first time he waved at me. But that's how I use this model here. And I will give you an opportunity to take some pictures of questions that you can ask yourself that fit into Gibbs's model of reflective practice. Next slide, please, Zachary. So one strategy for some of your EAL learners as well that may have SEN is Immersive Reader. It's on Word, and if you click on View on Word, then Immersive Reader. Next slide, please, Zachary. What you can do is you can differentiate any text that you have. It can break it down to syllables, it can highlight adjectives and nouns for you. It has a translator, so you'll see at the bottom, and it has a picture dictionary as well, so it has images. So this is how I connected with him initially. I would use Immersive Reader, and we would communicate via Immersive Reader. Next slide, please, Zachary. So don't worry too much about this slide, but if you want to take a picture of it, please do, because what I've outlined here are key questions you can ask yourself when you go through this reflective cycle and this reflective process. Reflection requires perception. It really requires you to really consider situations and people, from a different perspective. So take a picture of this and utilize these questions in turn and think to yourself, how often do I use this? And in the description session, one key question that really stuck out to me is, what did you want to happen? Because sometimes it's not a case that everything didn't go, really well. It may be that you had an idea in your mind, you had an image of how it would pan out, and it didn't quite happen in the way that you wanted, but there was still a lot of progress that was made, a lot of good that was made. So it's really considering reframing some of those questions and thinking about how you ask yourself those questions and others. Next slide, please, Zachary. So these are two questions that unfortunately we don't have time to really discuss today or answer, but really do think about them. How can you improve your reflective practice, and what do you need? There's that question again, what do you need? And speaking to the individuals that can support you, if it's something you need from your organisation, from your line manager, from your colleagues, or it may be, you decide I need to learn more about this. So think about how you can further educate yourself on particular topics. Next slide, please, Zachary. So how do I do this? So again, using a reflective model every day. So considering Gibbs's model, considering Kolb's model, and the graduated approach. Question your personal theories and beliefs. So this touches upon, again, would you want to be the teacher that teaches you, essentially? How do your personal beliefs and theories impact your perception of others? Think about how you interpret situations, whether it's other pupils of different cultures that you come across in in your diverse schools, or particular lessons you've had, and how your theories and beliefs, whether you think, actually, I've done this, I know what I'm doing, how can you challenge that further? It could be, yeah, I've done this, but how was this developed in the years since I've done it? Or what else is there? What current research is out there? How is this person doing it that's different to what I'm doing? And consider and implement alternative perspectives and possibilities. Change what you're doing if it isn't working. Change what you're doing. If you realise this isn't working, change what you're doing. Seek out new ideas, new strategies, speak to other individuals. Go and observe others as well. Next slide, please, Zachary. So when it comes down to the individual, I've got here Maslow's hierarchy of needs and also Carol Dweck's growth mindset. And these are two really crucial principles. And I didn't want this session to be about theory, but I wanted examples of actually what this looks like. I use growth mindset for myself, not just for my pupils, actually. I use it for myself first and foremost. I reframe some of the things that I need to, that I don't know. So, recently I was looking at some statistical analysis, and I was like, no idea. Well, no idea. I need to, what do I do here? I can't do it. And it was like, no. I right now, it may be that I can't do it, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do it. It wasn't a case of I give up. It's okay, I'm going to continue this tomorrow because I've had a break, I've reached my limit today. So, using this, modeling it, demonstrating within your lessons, getting feedback from your students about your lessons, not just about the learning. So I use these emojis. I get my students to rate my lesson, essentially. This lesson was, luckily they haven't circled the skull yet to say that it was a dead, boring lesson. But using that to, this is a way that I can relate to them because they love their emojis, and I find out actually how they felt about the lesson, what they think about it, how they felt during it. Were they happy? Were they bored? Were they overwhelmed? And next time, I ask them for feedback, whether it's next time, can we do more group work, or next time, can we do this? Can we start the lesson off with a discussion? So I ask for their feedback, and that really ensures that we've got their voice within the session as well, and that we're being reflective there. But also Maslow's hierarchy of needs, consider the needs of these students, be reflective. If Zachary came in today and he was really, sorry, I keep using you as an example, but he was really stroppy and was having a bit of a tantrum in the session. If he was my pupil, I might ask him, have you had anything to eat this morning, Zachary? Have you had any breakfast? Did you sleep well last night? I'll ask him questions about, rather than what's the matter, or why are you angry? I wouldn't use questions like that. It's actually trying to establish, what does that person need right now? Being reflective that behaviour is a form of communication within that moment, and how can we address that for that young pupil, and not just for that pupil, but for our colleagues and practitioners as well. Next slide, please, Zachary. So how do you view your organisation?
You do need to be wrapping it up fairly soon, okay?
How long have I got?
How long do you need?
I could probably, if I speak at this speed, I can do it in 4.5 minutes.
All right, we'll give you 4.5 minutes. Here's the thing, I think everyone out there knows, like, we could literally do weeks on this and with hands-on examples and workshops and all that. So we appreciate the fact that we've had to rush a little bit on some of these sessions. But yes, if you can do it in 4 minutes, that gives us 15 minutes at the end. So that would be great.
Great, no pressure then. No pressure then. So next slide, we're going to move on to the next slide then, Zachary. So the reason I've got this slide up is, why are we all here today? You know, why is everyone here today? What aligns us? Really considering, you know, the organisation, reflective practice as an organisation, it's really thinking about the values, the vision. Do they align with your values, your vision, the same with those young people? And is ensuring that we're being reflective of that within our organisation, as well as within our classrooms. Next slide, please, Zachary. Sorry, everyone, I'm not going to go into too much depth because I've got the pressure of 4 minutes now, which is probably 3.5. Data. I don't know how I feel about this word. I like data, but there's so much more to an individual than data. You can't quantify Hannah into a spreadsheet. You know, I don't believe that you will have the essence of who I am. You can't quantify me into a spreadsheet. Data is important and it's good practice, utilising it is good practice. However, data is not a person. How can you use useful information to inform your practice? Do you reflect upon this? Do you think, actually, I've given this to, if you're a leader or a Senko, I've given this information to these teachers. Have you reflected on how useful is this? As a practitioner, when you're given data or useful information, have you reflected on, how am I utilising this? What am I implementing? How am I doing that? And how am I collecting or sharing? Maybe you've collected useful information that you can share with your leaders and practitioners within school. Next slide, please, Zachary. So here I've got 2 examples. So the first one's an example of how I collect useful information within my organisation to really support the culturally responsive reflective practice. And the first one's for the primary school. And you will see this is child-centred. We're all here ultimately to support these young people and, you know, the other stakeholders. But actually, how do we make this child-centred? It's gathering useful information. I don't call it data, because actually it's information about that young person, their dreams, their aspirations, their strengths, their talents, their interests, their favourite things, their worries. So the one on the left is what I use at the primary school. The one on the right is what I use with the secondary school. And the young people complete this. They complete this. And even in terms of the classroom strategies, I will add additional classroom strategies through that. But they will tell me, actually, it really helps when my teacher does this. Actually, I find this really useful and beneficial. And then I will supplement that further. But this is very student focused. Next slide, please, Zachary. So developing reflective practice within your organisation. I'm going to give you a super quick anecdote, an example. So I was working with some teachers that required required support within my school, and after observations, and I realised that my conversations with them, they were saying like, yeah, it's good enough. What I'm doing, I'm putting this in place. It's good enough. And I realised actually there's a lot that wasn't happening. There was lots of good practice, but there was this mindset of it's good enough. What I'm doing is good enough, rather than thinking, how can I develop this further for these young people? So what I decided to do then is show me, don't tell me. And I use that all the time with staff. Show me, don't tell me. It's not just for our students, but also for our staff. So I partnered them up because some of them weren't really displaying that reflective practice. And if I'm being honest, that does happen at times. And sometimes as leaders or as practitioners, we may see that some teachers are maybe not being as reflective as needed. So I partnered them up with teachers that had strengths in particular in the areas that they needed development in. And they completed learning walks with each other, and they worked together, and they did some collaborative planning as well. And then I had a series of questions for them after. And what came from this is what was put in place was for you, with you, by you. And it was really, it's about empowering. I facilitate these, the support, I facilitate and I guide, but actually it's for you, with you, by you, and it's really empowering them. And when they observed others, they really started to pick up and go, you know what, I saw Mr. Walker do this in his lesson, it was great, so I'm going to use that further. And another thing that we also did was I would give them a list of strategies, and I would do this myself, but actually with other teachers so that they could see. I'd give them a list of strategies and they'd do learning walks with me, and we'd go around to classes, and it might be strategies from, you know, Hannah Hamid's IEP, and we'd just tick off the strategies that were being demonstrated within that lesson. And that really enabled us to see the consistency across the board, and it really allowed them to really reflect on consistency and what they're doing and how it feeds into the wider organisation. Next slide, please. So again, 2 questions that unfortunately we don't have time to answer, but I'll give you a moment. I'll give you 5 seconds to look at them. Oh no, it was 1 second. So on to the last slide. So how do I do this? Complete learning walks with teachers, partner teachers depending on areas of strength or development, collect useful information, not just quantitative data, implement practice that celebrates and recognises individual differences. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Another great quote from Brene Brown, which is you know, being clear with an individual, being honest. You know, when we're unclear about in our expectations, we create essentially a foundation for complacency and learned helplessness. It's ensuring that we're being, that clarity is kindness. That clarity enables somebody to further develop, and we're not developing that learned helplessness where I'm like, yeah, good job, Zachary, and that's it. It's actually, do you know what, that was great, Zachary, but here are some things that we can develop further. It's supporting them and empowering them in that manner. Next slide, on to the last 2. So an example of, in an organisation, how you can develop that culturally responsive reflective practice. You'll see right at the bottom, this is a curriculum map for English within my school for year 7. And within each unit, you'll see how we tie in diversity, how we ensure that there's that cultural aspects. The cultural aspects are tied into our curriculum. So it's not just we have a culture day and that's it. Again, this isn't a picture from my school. I stole this from Google, but it's really tying into that, not just having a cultural day. How is this part of your practice? How is this embedded in what you do as an organisation? How is it that you're reflecting upon the experiences of others? How is it that you're reflecting upon how you can support others and enable them to feel part of the community? And really asking yourself those questions in terms of how you as an individual feed into that, how you as an individual support that, whether you enable a reflective environment or not. And the last 2, I think the next slide. So this is another, because of time, I won't go through this all, but feel free to take a picture of this. And this is just a breakdown of strategies moving forward that you can take away from today and implement within your own practice. And the last slide. Now I've put next year, not knowing that your term is due to end very soon. Sorry, oh, you've changed it. Brilliant. So for next year, please ensure that you really do think about and actively implement these sessions, and set CPD sessions only really have an impact if you're actively implementing strategies. And it may be that you approach strategies that you already know from a different perspective, a different lens. Thank you, and thank you for listening to my really fast talk in there. I'm really sorry.
No, thank you, Hannah. Please do give her a round of applause or a thumbs up if you are available to do so. That's always nice to see. Thank you, Hannah. I think you know the sessions today were really good. We start with working with parents, we start with the classroom, and then we end with working with ourselves, essentially, right? So much of this is about working with ourselves. I have put the Mentimeter back up there. So I would love, if you don't mind, while we're kind of summarizing here, to look back at the Mentimeter and think about what are a couple things that you can potentially do? What's one thing you've learned from this session on being a reflective practitioner? Phil, San, and Poppy are also here in case we have any questions. I would like to summarize as we kind of come to a close in the next 10 minutes. I'd like to summarize a couple things though, because I think this is important. Either Hannah has frozen or she is taking a very long drink of water. I'm not sure, but either way, it's quite a great photo. I'll have to screenshot that so I have it for forever. There's a couple things here. So if we think back to that first session about parents, I asked the question at some point today, would you want to learn from you? I think it's also really important to ask yourself, would you want to work with you? And what I mean by that is, if you were walking down the hallway, are you the kind of teacher that other people want to work with? If a parent sees you, are you the kind of parent that, are you the kind of teacher that a parent says, oh, that teacher is so nice? Are you a teacher that's only ever negative? So much of the relationships that we have, so much of what we build is from how we work with others. And so not only would you want to learn from you, we have to constantly ask ourselves, would you want to work with you? Because that's really important to get the best out of everyone around us. Now, if we look at the second session today from Phil, Son, and Poppy about, you know, kind of teaching strategies, one of the things that I realized quite early when I was teaching, and I taught primary, I taught secondary for a while, but there were a couple things that really stuck out to me. I started to learn quite quickly that it really wasn't a learning disability in most cases. What it often was a teaching disability. I just wasn't a great teacher. And you know, so much of the things that we know about teaching are from how we were taught. And if we were taught in a very traditional way, where, you know, there were no excuses and everything was forced on assessment, and we didn't understand really how the brain works, we didn't understand some of these novel practices, we might not have been very good at it, because that's usually our default. So I think we can stop thinking about things so much as their disability and start thinking about our disability and you know, how can we be better as teachers? And I think that's a really important piece. I think finally, I guess the final thing I'll say on this last session is we talk a lot about inclusion. We talk a lot about diversity. I do a lot of work in this area with schools, with teachers, with corporate businesses that are looking at how they can, you know, be more inclusive. And the word that I've started to use even more than inclusion is belonging. Are you creating a space where people belong and where they feel like they belong? And Poppy referenced earlier her student, I think it was Jay, who is on the spectrum somewhere. And so she automatically used him to, I think, keep track of the visuals in the classroom, right? We can look at Jay and, as Hannah talked about, look at everything that's wrong, or we can say, you know what, that's a strength of his. And so he's going to be a part, he's going to belong in this classroom. And one of the ways I'm going to do it is put him in charge of something that I know he'll be really good at, right? And I think this is that final important point. And then again, we will have just a couple minutes here to open it up. Our job is hard, but it's really critical to remember that we might be the only bright spot in that kid's life. We might be the only thing that child has, because we don't know what they go home to sometimes. We don't know how their peers treat them outside of school. We don't know what the family thinks and culturally what they feel. As teachers, we might be the only good thing they have. And so regardless of how hard it is, it's our responsibility to create an environment where they belong. It's our responsibility to learn and implement strategies. It's our responsibility to work with parents and to work with colleagues, not just deal with parents and deal with colleagues. And I think it's really important that we keep that mindset. And if we do that, we'll get a little bit better every day. It's been referenced, and Hannah talked a lot about this. None of us know everything, but we just have to take a little bit of a step every day, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's really critical that we keep that mindset. If we can just get a little bit better every day, that's the most important thing. So, you know, at the start of the day, we went through 78 strategies today, and we went a little fast there at the end, so we might only got through 73 or 71 or even 72. But your assignment was, if you go back to the start of the day, was to pick 3 or 5 of them that you can start implementing next year. And I really do hope that you did find 3 to 5. I will hand it over to Dr. Myra now because she has popped her video back on and she tells me what to do a lot and I want to listen. And she provided me with these incredible chocolate things. So if there are any questions or anything, I think we can take them. But Myra, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Zachary. Thank you, Poppy. Thank you, Philson. Thank you, Hannah. Is there anyone else that I have missed from your team, Zachary? There's one more. Poppy.
Heba did the first session.
And Heba as well. So I think Heba has already left.
Yes, she's out in Switzerland now, you know, playing.
So thank you all for being very, very patient with us, especially in the beginning, since we encountered a few difficulties that were unforeseen, but we managed nonetheless. And I'm also very grateful to our research team here at the UAE University. I'm not sure if all of our co-PIs are still with us because it's really very important to also acknowledge their contribution to the entire research project. So we earlier on, I think I saw Dr. Hala El Hawaris join us. She is the chair of the Special Education Department. I believe that we also had Dr. Amit Hamdan join us, and Dr. Osha, yay, the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs with the College of Education, is here with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Osha, for staying through the entire PD session. Dr. Ahmed Hamdan was here earlier as well, so thank you for being here. Dr. Rachel is unable to make it, but I can see her here at the office, so she's doing 1,000,001 other things. And of course, Dr. Najwa Mohammed Al-Hosami, who is our college dean and is also a part of this research project. But more importantly, our hardworking research assistants. Let me now begin with Hamda, because I have completely, this was a complete oversight on my part this morning. So Hamda has been wonderful in coordinating with teachers and in inviting them as well to attend this PD workshop, and she will be taking the lead in providing you with the attendance certificate. So she is very, very important. And I think she has been sharing the feedback form as well to all of you. And of course, Amani, for just endlessly and, being very fast in your typing as you do your translations. Thank you so much, Sheikh Hasana. You're with us for keeping the chat going on and just being there throughout. So you're all very much deeply appreciated. Of course, our partners, Emirates School Establishment. I know I only have 3 minutes left. Emirates School Establishment, KHDA, the Ministry of Education, all of these entities who had just opened up, their arms to us, welcomed us. All the schools who have just welcomed the research team as well in our focus group interviews with them. So it's really important for us to also give back to all of you through this professional development workshop. And I'm more than certain that the team from the UK had delivered so successfully today, right, Professor Zachary? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, they were okay. All right. No, I think obviously, as we mentioned, I mean, their wealth of knowledge, we could literally have a whole week on this. So we do hope that, again, everyone has taken some small things, and we love to do face-to-face stuff too, because you can really get your hands dirty a little bit. But we understand this is the environment we're in for now, and we look forward to hearing how you all implement and I think working together in the future too. And Myra, I know that we're going to make that happen. So I do want to give a little shout out to all the external partners. I did see many of them on today from ESE, from HCFA. So thank you so much for joining as well. It was wonderful to see everyone.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're pretty much good with time. So just 1 minute before our meeting ends. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate the partnership. Thank you.
I'm going to stay on the call for like 2 minutes just in case any questions do come in. If anyone else wants to stay, fine. If you need to go, go. It looks like we got someone just joining the lobby right now, so they get me for 2 minutes. But in all seriousness, thanks everyone on the UK team and the Doha team. Philson, that's you. And we really appreciate it, but we will stay around for just a couple minutes in case anybody wants to throw any questions in. If not, have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day.
And there will be more in the future, definitely,
Good.
as we continue this partnership. Yeah.
All righty. Bye, everybody. I'm going to eat more chocolate. Hannah, Poppy, Philson, thank you so much. I know that there's probably still people listening, but just thank you so much. Brilliant stuff. We'll catch up here shortly. Like I'll send you all a message so we can debrief and figure out how we can distribute the slides so that they're most helpful for our team here. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Oh, Poppy's muted.
Yeah.
Poor Amani, I just realised I was speaking so fast that her poor fingers.
Oh, I know. Amani and Sana were just incredible today. I mean, again, I don't actually know what they were saying. I couldn't read it, but they were putting stuff in so fast. I'm assuming it was somewhat right. We do have a question about practical books for improving teaching. I know Philson, you and Poppy had brought up a couple. We can share a couple of those books and the resources. I think that slide I'll go through. We can also maybe share a couple of the resources and websites. I think websites are really, really critical now because A, they're free in most cases, but B, they're the quick hitters. So I think that'll be helpful as well. Rochelle, on the question on certificates, I have no idea, but Amani, I see Amani's maybe got an answer. I think you're muted, Amani. Or your mic's not working? I don't know. Sorry, Amani, we can't hear you. Well, in that case, I am going to end with a joke because I have very funny jokes and I expect everyone to laugh. If you do know the joke, please do not ruin it for everyone else. This is classic. What do you call a fly with no wings? You call it a walk. Get it? It fly, it doesn't have wings. It has to. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much. Love you all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care.